Hello, everyone. I am Gui Valente, and this is the Valente Brothers podcast. We're here with Pedro Valente.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here once again.
And Joaquim Valente.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
So we're back for another episode. We are looking forward to another great discussion. This time, we're going to talk about a topic that we recently published a small article on, which is comparing Jigoro Kano, the judo jujutsu, why not, master, who is well recognized in the world of martial arts for having developed Kodokan Judo, and the brothers, Carlos and Helio Gracie, who are also very well recognized for having developed Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, Pedro, when we wrote the article, we felt that, of course, it was very well received, but some individuals, they tend to think that Jigoro Kano cannot be compared to anyone else, that he's above a certain level, which does not allow us to even dare to compare him with anyone else. What do you think of that?
Well, I believe that in the study of history, we must always keep an open mind. History is often told by the victors in any situation. And there's no doubt that the Kodokan was able to prevail over all the other styles of jiu-jitsu that existed in Japan. And yes, the Kodokan was a style of jiu-jitsu. If we study the reasons why Jigoro Kano changed the name, we understand that it wasn't because he felt that he was creating a whole new martial art. We like to say that it's a case of rebranding because of the reputation of jiu-jitsu at the time, which was seen as something dangerous and without discipline and philosophy. But the word judo already existed. One of the jiu-jitsu schools used that name. And Jigoro Kano, in an effort to be honest, felt that it would be not proper to create a completely different name. So it was a style of jiu-jitsu. It was a methodology of teaching jiu-jitsu.
Which, for the Japanese, are very similar words. I think for us, it sounds a little bit more different than what it would sound for a Japanese person. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, because the base kanji character is still the same, ju. The thing is that in the word judo, because it's official as a Japanese art in modern times, they transliterated the first kanji character correctly.
Even though at one point it was also sometimes...
Because when it first came to the West, they were still using Jiu, because the Japanese native speaker pronounces it Jujutsu, Jujutsu. But the right way to transliterate that character is Ju.
And when we say the right way, it's what eventually in Japan was established.
Yeah, the conventional methods of transliteration between
it's actually
kanji.
There are a few different methods, but the one that is recognized and used in this case is the Hepburn method.
If you go to a Japanese person and you say, what does this mean, Jiu, they won't understand.
Yes.
But Ju, they will. It has a meaning. It means yielding flexibility, gentle, soft, flexible.
And
Anyways,
because at the time there was no official way to translate that.
To transliterate.
Exactly. You see in different parts of the world the way that it was written, even with Y sometimes being
Correct.
used.
Many different attempts to phonetically write that word. You're right.
Anyways, but going back, Pedro, I think the point is that it was a judo or a jiu-jitsu style.
Yes, judo was a style of jiu-jitsu, because we can talk about the pedagogy and the teaching methodologies, but when it comes to the actual fighting skill, you're talking about mainly you have striking techniques, then you have in the clinch the throwing techniques, and then on the ground, originally, it's where it gets decided through a lock, either a choke or a joint lock. That was, and what's unique, because you also have wrestling systems around the world with the same idea, but what's unique about Japanese wrestling, which is another term that was used very often in the West to describe this in the beginning of the 20th century. The unique feature is the guard. Because all the other wrestling systems, as far as I know, did not have this battle of the guard, of the person on top trying to defeat the leg work, the guard, and the person on the bottom trying to attack and defend from the guard. In wrestling, you turn on your belly to avoid the pin and you try to get up.
And in wrestling, if you're inside somebody's guard, you're pinning them.
Correct.
If you're the person on top, you're winning. You don't have to pass the guard.
So what was unique about the Japanese wrestling system is that it keeps going until somebody taps. And the feature of the guard, not that in wrestling you didn't have matches that went until somebody tapped, but the feature of the guard.
But we can say that it was not Japanese to include pinning.
No.
You learn how to pin, but you would not win a jiu-jitsu match through pinning.
Because the throw and the pin were paths, were accessories, were supplements to the main goal, which is to make the person tap. So you could use a throw to get to a position that would enable you to win the fight on the ground.
So this was happening before Kodokan Judo was established in Japan.
Correct. In the 20th century, before Kodokan, and the end of the Edo period, and the beginning of the Meiji Restoration.
Even though there were many jiu-jitsu styles.
Correct. But there was a jiu-jitsu movement, because jiu-jitsu can mean many different things in different places and different times. You have fighting with armor, you have fighting that's more based on striking, you have fighting with small weapons. It can mean a lot of different things.
That focused, like we like to say, on the different expressions of jiu-jitsu.
Correct. But when you have this movement, a lot of people don't know this. Because some people say there's no relation between the jiu-jitsu that was practiced in Japan before the Kodokan and the jiu-jitsu that is practiced in Brazil. That is a mistake. There's no similarity. Yes, there is. There was a movement of randori, of sparring, in Japan in the 20th century where matches were taking place around Japan. Informal matches and training in the schools and also organized competitions where fighters would face each other without striking, grapple, wearing kimonos, and continue on the ground and trying to choke each other, trying to arm lock each other.
This is very well documented.
Correct.
But Pedro, let me just ask Joaquim a question, and I think it would be beneficial for us to then talk about Jigoro Kano and then talk about the Gracie brothers, Carlos and Helio. Joaquim, the question I have for you is this, and we have to take into consideration time, of course. Mm-hmm. In English, I think it would be anachronism. I hope I'm saying it correctly in English. We don't want to commit anachronism. But you began training judo formally. We all train judo. We are all very appreciative, very grateful to our judo teachers who helped shape us in our martial arts. We respect Jigoro Kano tremendously. We actually find inspiration in Jigoro Kano's work, right, to continue to perfect and develop our system, our methodology. But as a judo student, did you feel that in any way, shape, or form, what you learned from Helio Gracie was Kodokan Judo?
No.
Why not?
Because the way that the classes were structured and even the pedagogy system that Grandmaster Helio used was quite different. Obviously, there was similarities because if not, then there's a big chance we wouldn't practice, because we always practice judo with full disclosure and with an encouragement of Grandmaster Helio to be able to further our training in the stand-up aspect of throwing. But the styles were very different, right? The way that the classes were structured and even the ranking system and you know what you had to do to be able to be promoted and all that. I always felt that, you know, it was very different. There were, I think, very nice things that influenced us, but But Grandmaster Helio had
It was more free, you would
Yeah.
say. Jiu-Jitsu was a lot more free, less structured.
less structured, more free. I think more room for you to really, see the personal side of the student and all that. And, Grandmaster Helio would value, and we have spoken about even a report card that talk about the value of the student and all that. And, not saying that the classes there didn't value the personal side of the student, but it was very organized into a methodology where you had to know specific things. There was a board on the wall where you had the techniques that were necessary for the specific belts. Judo, exactly.
Yeah. And Pedro, what was really, if you had to maybe in a few words, what was the main difference? Joaquim touched on the methodology, right, of judo. He talked about the board and the techniques. What would be the main difference between judo and the way that Helio Gracie taught?
They both had grappling techniques and throwing techniques, but judo was way more focused on the throwing techniques, seeing the grappling techniques as an accessory, as a complement to the throws. So you spent more time, significantly more time, working on the throwing techniques and not the grappling techniques. With Grandmaster Helio, yes, we learned throws, but the throws were more of an accessory. It was like way to take the fight to the ground, which is where you win the fight. So the emphasis was more on the grappling techniques on the ground more than the throws.
Very interesting.
That's the main difference.
If I had to answer the question, I would. I agree with all of you, but I would also touch what's really, very present in my mind when I think of Grandmaster Helio's method was how instinctual it was for him. Judo, like you said, was very structured, almost academically. I feel that, if I remember, most judo instructors had a degree, had an academic degree, university degree, physical education degree. So you felt that academic approach, which I think is great. But Grandmaster Helio, what would he want us to do whenever we asked him a question? So let's see if you remember. You would come to, I'll ask Joaquim first. We would call him Tio Helio, Uncle Helio. Tio Helio, I feel like they're using this and that technique. What do you think? How would he answer it?
Do it to me.
So I can feel it and I can come up with the answer on the spot.
And then he would usually come up with a very nice solution, and then he would often reprimand us. What would he say?
You could have figured it out yourself.
And I think that students that train with us, they are really gonna, put themselves in a position where they have felt that way, right? Because Grandmaster Helio taught us something that I always try to pass on to the students, which is you don't want the student to be dependent on you as a teacher. You want to give them the skills to learn something that is extremely organic, right? And to develop the ability to further their learning process through the practice of Jiu-Jitsu. We're there just to kind of guide them and to help them sometimes make that process a little bit more efficient. But I think that's something that is very present within our school today. That is something that we learn from Grandmaster Helio, which is we could teach a series of seminars, and nothing against people that do this, but just on open guard, for example, and hours and hours and hours of classes. But I don't feel that's the best way for someone to be able to learn the open guard. The best way to develop the open guard is to give them the guidelines of what is the open guard, and then the repetition, and allow each person that has a different size of legs, of different flexibility, maybe past injuries that are going to limit them to be able to further the development.
Yeah.
And I think that was Grandmaster Helio's way of teaching.
And it's what we see a lot in our youth program, right? Kids that never trained jiu-jitsu before, they develop moves that they were never taught.
Yeah. But let me make a point, because we have to remember that Helio Gracie had a very structured program, the 36 lessons, where you learn lesson 1. We're not saying that there's no structure. And I think the problem with this debate is because people they only look at it's so polarized that people only look at the extremes. Jigoro Kano had no influence in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's no influence. That's not true. Obviously, the judo movement had a tremendous impact.
Mitsui Maeda was a
jiu-jitsu.
top student at the Kodokan.
Yes, the Gracies learned from a judo practitioner. So we're not denying that. But then other people on the other side, on the other extreme, want to say, no, jiu-jitsu is judo. It's the same. It's just an adaptation of judo, but it's basically judo. The whole structure of judo is in jiu-jitsu. And that's not true either.
Yeah, I think this phenomenon is really related to something that you see a lot in sports, unfortunately, and I think for the study of history, this is very detrimental to the study of history. I was talking today to one of our friends, and you cannot allow yourself to become that emotional.
Correct.
Where just because you have a piece of information that you think is correct, or because you wrote a book, and now anything against that becomes equivalent to the New York Yankees playing the Boston Red Sox.
But it's important that we go...
Vasco playing Botafogo, Fluminense.
But we must go to the like
root cause.
The root cause, o X da questão, right? The main point of this argument, which is people who hate the Gracies. That's what you have out there. People who are Gracie haters. And why do they hate the Gracies? It's difficult to understand. Is it because they revolutionized the martial arts with the creation of the UFC? Is it because of their success, which generates envy in people? Because people say they're criminals. And then, when they were 18 years old, they did this and they went to jail, and they look for it's not, jiu-jitsu is not really, yes, they were good, but they were doing judo. They always want to diminish their credit.
But that's the emotional side.
Correct?
Yeah.
That's the point.
And Pedro, I think this is, I think you touched on the main point behind this. Unfortunately, some people might not even realize that, and then they might be influenced by that. But unfortunately, and I think, of course, Carlos and Helio Gracie, they were talking about fighting, and back in the day, they had to fight to prove what they were teaching many times.
And it made a lot of people angry, especially the people who lost.
Correct. And unfortunately, also, I think that they've achieved a level of success that has surpassed many other martial arts, and this is okay. I think there are cycles, but I think you're right. Why don't we talk a little bit about Jigoro Kano? Because as I said before, we have so much respect for Jigoro Kano. The only thing we might disagree with some judo practitioners, and I think today I say that this is probably a minority, I believe, and we're going to address this in today's talk, but judo was developed with a very big religious influence, right? You agree?
Yes. Shinto is most important.
And some of the rituals, right, I think that's a proper name, that were used and are still used in some judo schools are very religious-like. That's why I used the term in the article, quasi-religious. And students, since they're very young, they start their classes kneeling and bowing down from a kneeling position to Jigoro Kano's picture. We understand the culture of Japan. We respect it deeply. It's probably one of my favorite places to visit in the whole world. Can't wait to go back there again. But it's undoubtedly a process that you have this person's picture on the wall, you're kneeling down, you're bowing down when the class starts, when the class ends, and this person is regarded almost as a superhero, semi-god. And this creates a process of maybe a shield where this person cannot be discussed and cannot be compared.
Yeah, because
and this is wrong.
Because you could say that he cannot be even criticized. But I don't remember one time where I have criticized Jigoro Kano. It's not even criticizing him.
I believe that certain individuals don't like that we compare his achievements. We try to make a comparison between his achievements and Carlos and Helio. And we're doing that to elevate all of them. But
it's not just that. They don't. I agree with you. They don't like that we compare, but they also don't They expect him to have full credit for the creation of everything that came from Japan in the grappling world to the West. Full credit. Sambo is judo. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is judo. Everything is created by Jigoro Kano and nobody else.
Because even judo, to what it's, judo is referred to today, which I think is the question of what I practiced, is very different.
Correct.
Than
That's
from
why-
what, and I think that's why time in relationship to history and looking at, the achievement of each person's intentions over time will change.
But let me make the point.
And if someone visited, and I'll bring this up even upon ourselves, the person who visited Valente Brothers in 2001 has a very different experience inside of our school than someone who visits the school now in 2024.
Correct. But it's important to say, and that's what I'm going to say right now is what a lot of our more fanatical judo friends don't like. Judo was always more focused on throws
Kodokan
than
judo.
grappling. Kodokan judo was always more focused on throws than grappling. Jigoro Kano himself, he trained in Kitoryu, which was more focused on the throws because of the body armor, etc. And you had Tenjin Shinryu, which had an emphasis on the ground. And he enjoyed the throws more. And part of his mission was to create a style of sparring that gave more importance to the throws.
Didn't he speak about the reasons why he
did
this?
He felt that even in self-defense, that in a street fight, you don't want to be rolling on the ground. And we're not discussing the merit of his argument. We are just stating a fact that Jigoro Kano believed that the throws should have... and I'm not saying that he didn't teach ground, that ground was not part of his system. I'm not saying that. Because people always like to take the extreme view. I'm saying that the throws to Jigoro Kano were more important than the ground. And that,
I think that's
let
obvious.
me complete. No, it's not obvious to a lot of people.
If you ask him the difference between training judo and training jiu-jitsu,
Yeah, but a lot of people will say,
Yeah,
no,
people
but that's
say
back
that-
then.
exactly.
Back
People-
then it was different.
They say that was a natural transition, and
That's
the
not
Olympics and
anachronism.
Yes, but it's not anachronism because it's always been that way. Let me read here from Jigoro Kano admitting that jiu-jitsu was stronger than the Kodokan on the ground. He said, quote, from Jigoro Kano himself, at that time, students from other schools came to the Kodokan for matches, but very few were of a level that posed any serious threat. There were a number of highly skilled fighters in the Metropolitan Police Department representing various other jiu-jitsu schools. Virtually no one was particularly effective at nagewaza, which means throwing techniques, but some were able to torment us with newaza. After that, we began to study these techniques intensively.
So, but Pedro, why do you believe Jigoro Kano's way became the way?
Because of
Why did he prevail?
Because of his huge political influence. Jigoro Kano was a very important person in Japanese society. He was a very intelligent person, and he achieved a lot in his life.
Not just through judo.
Not just through judo. He was the first Asian representative in the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. He was a very respected educator in Japan and involved with many other activities.
Yeah, when I visited the Kodokan Museum, you could see some of his achievements, even in swimming, in physical education in general.
And the truth is that most of the jiu-jitsu teachers in Japan of that time were not, because Japan had still a class system, a caste system, and most of jiu-jitsu teachers were not in the upper caste.
Well,
and had no intention in their styles to do what Jigoro Kano was doing.
Well, Jigoro Kano had a goal of unifying jiu-jitsu in Japan under the judo banner.
And that's what I'm saying. But there was no one else trying to unify that had an interest more for the ground, for example.
No.
No, because, and that's the point. This is a very deep conversation, and we're just going to be very general today. But if you go and you analyze Jigoro Kano's family, you understand why Jigoro Kano was also interested in this more globalist approach. Jigoro Kano's father, and it's a long story, but Jigoro Kano's father, to say that Jigoro Kano's father and family were only sake producers is very, very
Misleading.
yeah, I'm not sure if it's misleading. Yes, it is.
No, it is misleading.
I don't think that's the intention.
Sure.
I hope that's not the intention, but it's far from reality.
It's a part of the truth.
Exactly.
Correct.
It's
Because
true, but there's more to it.
Jigoro Kano's father had a very high position in the Tokugawa period and in the early years of the Meiji Restoration. He had a very high position because of his family's influence in the naval industry. He had a very high position in the Japanese Navy. So,
Not as a Navy officer, but he was influential in the Navy.
correct. So to say that Jigoro Kano did not benefit from this is unacceptable.
But also we don't want to say
But we don't want to say that Jigoro Kano only achieved what he achieved because of his parents or his family, because that would be very unhealthy.
There's merit.
And unfair. He
To
worked
the-
very hard.
To the argument.
Correct.
Right? And
It's a combination of factors, but the fact that matters here is that he was very influential.
yes, and I think that's the point.
Yeah.
He had an influence, and as Joaquim said, that was a mismatch compared to any other jiu-jitsu representative of the time.
Correct.
And I think that that's something that we have to analyze. And that's something that we should look into.
That's why his point of view prevailed, and judo became the sport of judo, even though he had to negotiate in the Butokukai, and there was opposition. But eventually, we know judo. It's based on throws.
Correct.
And there's some ground, but it's limited.
So let me ask you a question, because I was trying to get there. In this discussion, there's a big argument used by many of our judoka friends, right, and researchers, that there was a dispute, or there was a challenge between jiu-jitsu practitioners and Kodokan judo practitioners. And the Kodokan judo practitioners won. This is in the
13 out of 15 matches against the Totsuka Ryu school.
Correct. And what were the rules, Pedro?
Most of the matches were won by throws.
But why? Since before Kano's influence, the fights would continue on the floor until somebody tapped.
Because Jigoro Kano adapted the rules for what he felt was most important in a confrontation.
But why did they accept? Why the jiu-jitsu?
Well, I think we cannot say that, okay, before Jigoro Kano, every single match was decided on the ground, because there was no definitive set of rules that was being practiced. In different places, you would have different rules. So I'm not even sure if there wasn't a style that was practicing with victory by throws.
I'm just raising questions.
But the truth is that there was a group of jiu-jitsu representatives in Japan at the time who were opposing this effort by Jigoro Kano to limit ground fighting, to limit certain joint locks like foot locks, and to give more weight to the throws, of making the throws of equal importance to the submission, to the finishing hold. For example, at that time, you had to throw 2 times to win, not like today. So Jigoro Kano said, well, then you have to get 2 submissions to win as well.
Yeah.
And then, most notably, Mataemon Tanabe argued, said, no, the submission is when you get one submission, it should be over. That's how we do it at the Metropolitan Police. And there was an argument. Jigoro Kano said, I don't care how it's done at the Metropolitan Police.
But why was Jigoro Kano so powerful?
I'm not saying that Tanabe did that in the Totsuka matches. Now I'm talking about later in the 1890s. But Jigoro Kano was so powerful because of the reasons that we described. He was a very intelligent man who achieved a lot in his life, in his studies. He was a scholar. He was a pedagogue. He was well respected. He comes from a noble, from an important family, an influential family. All these factors together.
And I think also, the moment that Jiu-Jitsu was going through in Japan was also the perfect, territory, or we should call the perfect
breeding ground.
breeding grounds, exactly, for him to be able to plant what he wanted.
Very fertile.
Because Japan was going through a major transformation.
Exactly.
Which, by the way,
And Jiu-Jitsu had problems.
let me just
Yes.
make this quick point about the caste system. The family of Jigoro Kano was in commerce, right? Not in agriculture. And if you look at the samurai, but it's very important to say that, well, that would be anachronism too, to say that they were not so important or that they were not on top of the caste system, because towards the end of the Edo period, because of several reasons, including the fact that Japan was living peaceful times, the samurai lost a lot of prestige and power already. And that resulted in the samurai class losing a lot of money. And the class that was making the most money were the businessmen, to use a more modern term. And that's how the Kano family at that point was already in practice on a very high position when it came to the Japanese society. I think it's also important to mention, Pedro, that Jigoro Kano, he was responsible for, as you said, changing the rules of these matches. So my question to you is this: is it fair to say...
There were other jiu-jitsu teachers in Japan that were supporting Jigoro Kano as well.
I understand. But is it fair to say that this so-called challenge that happened, and a lot of people credit, or they want to say that because of this challenge, Jigoro Kano and Kodokan Judo became the leading force in Japan, but would it be fair to compare it to today trying to create a challenge between judo practitioners and BJJ practitioners, but then having the rules be so that the throw wins? And,
Sure.
and then
Yes,
the
same.
judo practitioners having success, and then saying judo is better than jiu-jitsu, which
Absolutely.
that's what happened.
Absolutely.
Is this well documented, Pedro?
Yes.
So a lot of people
Because
don't
you have
know
the
this.
results of the matches and you say he won by haraigoshi, he won by... So that means that you're winning by a throw against many practitioners who were used to deciding the matches on the ground many times.
So this gives us...
And also we need to understand that Jigoro Kano, it's not that Jigoro Kano made his changes and everybody applauded. There was opposition to what he was doing by people who wanted to continue to have the fights being decided by submissions on the ground. And this argument continued within judo. Later, when the other jiu-jitsu schools pretty much disappeared and Jigoro Kano succeeded in unifying jiu-jitsu under the banner of judo in Japan and changing the name, it's continued. For example, many years later in the Kozen movement, which was in the 7 imperial universities, the practitioners started to use the grappling as the main strategy for victory instead of the throws. And Jigoro Kano protested and got very upset and told the universities to change the rules so that could not happen. And they said, no, we're not. We're not going to change. And if you continue to insist, we're going to start promoting our students independently from the Kodokan. And he had to accept. Eventually, the Kozen movement pretty much died. You still have the Nanate tournament, but it's very small. But it's not like Jigoro Kano's view was unanimous, even after he established judo, meaning that there were always movements at that time to try to create a bigger balance between ground and throwing.
And with all due respect to Jigoro Kano, I believe that as far as one-on-one, mano-a-mano challenge in a controlled environment, his theory was debunked.
Correct. And Tanabe used to say that, and many others used to criticize Jigoro Kano's system by saying you cannot defeat a bigger person by relying on throws alone, but you can defeat them by relying on the ground alone.
Especially when two fighters who know jiu-jitsu, who know judo, they fight each other. For you to throw this other person, I believe, and this would be something that please feel free to leave your opinion on the comment section, those that train jiu-jitsu, judo, it's a lot harder to throw another expert than to who's bigger than you, who's much stronger than you, right? That's the point, the size difference, then possibly to catch him on the floor. And I think we saw this. We've been seeing this in judo, and I'll say that when I watch Judo Olympics, Pedro, Joaquim, because we grew up watching Yamashita. Yamashita was a Japanese judo hero, heavyweight, who won the 1984 gold medal
In Los Angeles.
in Los Angeles. You know, I'm always looking for that next Yamashita. But who has won the last, I think, 4 Olympic gold medals in the heavyweight division?
Teddy Renier, the French giant.
And Teddy Renier, who's a great technician as well. But I think what's the difference between Teddy Renier and all these other Japanese heavyweights that he has overcome? Is it because Teddy Renier is better only because he's better technically?
No.
He knows more than
As
these
you said, he's very good technically. We're not trying to take anything away from him. But he's bigger.
He's bigger. Now, Joaquim, do you think that Teddy Renier, if it was a jiu-jitsu style match, continue on the floor, do you think that we could say, we can only speculate, but someone on the floor would have caught him in a footlock, would have surprised him?
I think there's a higher chance.
Exactly.
And I think, you know, this has to be very clear. We're not saying that if you're fighting with someone on the ground who's bigger and stronger than you, that also knows jiu-jitsu, that you're not going to have a hard time.
Of course.
Right? And I'm not saying that someone smaller cannot throw
I'm
someone
talking
bigger.
about what Jigoro Kano was
Exactly.
pushing at the time.
Yeah. But if you train both, you know that once you take the fight to the ground, it gives you a little bit more of a level of comfort to be able to survive, especially if you have a style that's highly dependent on your defensive style where you can get the other person tired and then you can start. Well, I think a great example of this is Minotauro's fight against Bob Sapp.
Yeah, unbelievable. That was Helio Gracie. Pedro was there with Helio Gracie sitting front row. And, Minotauro, Rodrigo Minotauro versus Bob Sapp. If you haven't watched that, it's a great example of this. Imagine if Minotauro had to take down Bob Sapp.
No,
right?
in the beginning, he tried not to be taken down by just going to the ground. Right, he actually attempted, I think, to go for a double leg, but he was on the ground. He was, he tried to lower his center of gravity to the ground as much as possible, and Bob Sapp, hugs him by
the waist,
around the waistline, picks him up above the head, and spikes him head first into the ground. So,
Minotauro was able to turn his neck and land on his shoulder. That could have killed him.
Yeah.
So let's do this, Pedro. It's 40 minutes.
So let me just make this point.
Cut this. And let's start. Because we're going to do part 2.
Okay, I just want to make a quick point
to finish this segment.
The Kodokan at the time, I'm talking about the second half of the 19th century. The Kodokan had better throws. They really improved that. But the jiu-jitsu schools, some of the jiu-jitsu representatives at the time had better ground. That's a very important point to be made.
Perfect. So we still have to talk about Carlos and Helio. And we will stop it right here. And we will continue in our next episode. Please don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like our videos. And share it with your friends. And turn on the notification bell. Thank you so much.